Welcome. Going to be writing a script, technically for a comic book, but I'm going to write it in screenplay format because I prefer to write that way. I'm going to start out with Scene in the Desert. As you might be able to see here. I guess I could put this a little bigger. Right now, the character doesn't have a name, so we'll just call him Cowboy. Now, if you're not familiar with screenplay format, we'll talk a little bit about it as we go through. You can see here, I've highlighted, I have, in this introduction of this character, I have boldened, it's capitalized his name, right? That is what you do when you introduce a character. You're supposed to, for the first time, you put him in there like that. Want to just oops, spelled squeezes wrong. I'm going to go back here and add a little bit up to the top where I have, so here it says below him in the valley, so I'll just read it. The cowboy is spread out prone on a cliff overlooking a small valley. He is sighting a rifle. Below him in the valley are two deer drinking from a small brook. The cowboy squints and looks down the iron sights of his rifle. The deer are brought into focus in the middle of the sights. The leveled sights. The cowboy takes a breath and squeezes the trigger, would be the correct grammatical composition there. So now I'm going to go back and describe a little bit more of what's happening in this scene, but this doesn't need to be some really fantastic prose. It just needs to be clear what actions are happening. And the intention behind it needs to be clear. So if the character is feeling some sort of emotion that you want to be conveyed, you want to put that in this description part. If they're doing an action, it's got to be in there. If they look a certain way, if their clothes are disheveled, if they're holding something, all that has to be within this bit, so that whoever's, in this case, drawing the comic, or in another case, getting a film production together, knows what is necessary to the story. And you don't want to have too many superfluous details in this. You want to write it in such a way that it is clear and concise. That's my opinion. At least that's what I was taught in the screenwriting class that I took. I took a lot of writing classes, only one screenwriting class. I can go back and add a little bit more detail to this now that I have the overall structure of what I'm writing in this paragraph down. I can go back and add a little bit more. How do you spell vegetated? Vegetated. Added too many T's. Vegetated. That's what I wrote. One of the things about writing is it's not that interesting to watch somebody write something. It's much more interesting to see somebody draw something or put something together that you can actually see and not have to just read. But I thought it might be interesting to see me write this opening scene. Now, if you don't know, one of the common things you see in film is that whenever someone or in comics, I suppose, whenever someone is shooting something, you know, you're looking down the sights or a scope of a firearm, and it's always dead center in the sights. But in real life, often you will aim, depending on how far away they are, you will aim at a higher spot than where you're shooting, because that it's sighted in for a certain distance and it has to be adjusted because of that. So you don't often see that in films. It's usually like a sniper just right to the guy and pew, shoots him right in the middle of the scope, right? You could do that differently, where you have the scope in the actual position where it would be depending on the distance. So some distances are such that if you're sighted in for a certain distance, that sighting will work at some other distances, but not everybody knows that, right? So you could tell the viewer or the reader that information, but if you were just to throw them into it without understanding why, they'd think, oh, they're going to miss. Wait, why did they hit? Okay, that they wouldn't understand because they don't know that information. So it has to be communicated, either through the narrative you set up prior in the story, them learning how to shoot, and you put that information in there. Or you have them, some sort of narrative, a narrator or something at that point, conveying that information. They're teaching someone to shoot when they're shooting. They're relaying that information to them. But because people don't have that information, they don't know it. Whether it's the screenwriter doesn't know, they're just ignorant about how firearms work, or they don't want to confuse the audience and they don't want to have to set up that information. They just put them in the center of the scope, at the center of the sights, and let it be. If they're going to show that information, right? The sights or the scope and the animal or human being. Thank you, Edwin. So it all depends on how you want to do it. Like, what kind of a story are you trying to tell them? Are you trying to be very, very accurate to the situation, to what would most likely be the case? Or are you trying to have an easier flowing narrative? Those are things you have to take into account when you're writing, because simplicity may be, in some cases, better than accuracy to reality. You may choose to withhold information or simplify something so that people understand what's happening, and you don't have to teach them something else. Or you may choose to teach them this new bit of information. It's all up to you as the writer and what your intentions are. So far we have an exterior in a desert landscape. It's day. This is the basic information we need to set up the scene. You already have something in your mind. You know what a desert looks like. You know what it looks like during the day. And so you have something in your mind. It says the cowboy is spread out prone on a cliff. So we know he's laying down. On the front of his body is on the ground. On at least a small cliff. I'm going to put small cliff. I don't want it to think that he's on top of a mountain or something. A small cliff overlooking a small valley. I guess we don't need that because we have the small valley. It kind of implies it. So we'll leave it the way it was. Around him is a lightly vegetated desert, a few different varieties of cactus, some small trees and shrubs. What I want to put in the background here to indicate where in the world he is, I'm going to put behind him are 3 large saguaro cacti. Or some, let's change that to 2 large saguaro cacti and 1 smaller saguaro. separated. How do you spell separated? Separated, right? Am I crazy? That's 2 A's, not 2 E's. All right, okay. What is 2 E's? Not 3 E's. Separated by a small distance. One of the larger Swaro has had a limb loss. Well, actually, I'm going to change it to has had the top of the Swaro is missing. Is missing its top. There we go. He is sighting a rifle. Below him in the valley are 2 deer drinking from a small brook. They appear to be 2 does, one much smaller than the other. That doesn't need to be a new sentence. Just put a comma there. The cowboy squints and looks down the iron sights of his rifle. The larger deer is brought into focus in the middle of leveled sights. So here you can see I've chosen to do that. Alternatively, what you could do is cut between. You could cut between 2 of the 2 subjects. So you could cut between the deer and the guy, and then get them closer and closer. So you're having close-ups, and then you have a close-up on the midsection of the deer and a close-up of the guy looking down the sides. And that would relay the same information, but you wouldn't have to do what we talked about earlier. Edwin asks, is there a smell, a feeling like heat, or a sound? So in this case, what I'm going to be doing is building towards the crack of the rifle. So I'm purposely leaving out any description of anything that's non-visual at this point. Because this is going to be turned into a comic book. I will think in that manner, but I do plan on writing this so that it could be also used for a film if based on the screenplay. So that's why I'm writing it in this format, because I feel like it's easier to adapt to a comic book from the screenplay. Just my opinion, and that's what I know how to write. So you also want to be thinking about the purpose of your actions, right? Everything in your screenplay or your story should have a purpose to it. If you have a scene in your story, it needs to either progress the story or progress the character, and so they're learning a skill or they're finding out some bit of information. They're progressing the relationship that they're building in the romantic story, whatever it is. Even better is when you have all 3 of those things, if you can merge those, right? So let's say we have a romance. And in this romance, these 2 characters have met and they're going on a date. And they go to a place where they're learning something. Let's say that one of the romantic partners is teaching the other how to use a bow and arrow or a firearm as part of the date. They're progressing the story of their romance. They're progressing the relationship between the 2 people. One of the people is learning how to do something. Now, later in the story, you then bring in that element. So the thing that they learned earlier in the story, you bring that back into the story. If the character goes, let's say your character goes to a bookstore and buys a book. Well, why did they buy the book? Are you just conveying information that they like to read? Why did they pick a specific book? What was the purpose of the scene? Did they meet somebody in the bookstore? Why is that scene included in your story? How does it progress the narrative? How does it progress them as a character? What does it do? And you need to think about that stuff. And then each scene, you think about how can I convey the themes of the story into this narrative? How can I reinforce, if I have some sort of theme, how can I pack in some symbols, right? That give this, give this story a little bit more depth. Is there something that matters to the character? Is there something that happens in the story that you can allude to earlier in the story? And those are things you need to be, you can think about. Ideally, what you might want to do is have a decent beginning idea of where the character is and an ending point. Hopefully you can find a good middle climax point. But if you have at least where the character is in the beginning of the story and where they are at the end, then as you write your story, you can build towards that ending. You can foreshadow. You can put imagery in there that suggests what the outcome might be. The cowboy takes a breath and squeezes the trigger. The rifle crack. I'll put the crack. The rifle is loud enough to deafen. I don't want to say that. That implies that he's going to go deaf. So we want to say the crack is very loud. Resounds. An echo around the valley. So the crack of the rifle is very loud and resounds in an echo around the valley. One of the deer, so larger of the two deer, falls to the ground. After taking a few steps, the other deer runs way down the valley. Hello, Lady Vixen. Welcome. So that's our opening. That's our opening scene. Now, the opening action of the story. We don't have any dialogue yet. We don't have any. We have one character, and he's doing something. What have we learned about the character in this time that we've interacted with them, that we've seen them doing something? Well, he appears to be alone. There's no one around him. He's out in the desert. He's hunting. And he appears to be a good shot, as he has shot this deer from somewhat of a distance. So we know what he is capable of. We know that he's resourceful because he can hunt for his own food. Now we could do is add some more information here. We could say the exact setting. We could go back up here and we could say not just a cliff overlooking a small valley, but we could say where is this in relation to something. We could also have, if we want to include this information in there, we could say, you know, not just desert landscape, but we could go even more specific. We could say Arizona territory, desert, day. Boom. Now, there's even more information related. So that the artist who is going to turn this into a visual medium has more information. They could put some sort of narrative box, if they're drawing a comic right there, that says Arizona territory. You could say the year. We could even say put the year in it of when it's taking place. Or if they're making a film, they could put that on the screen, so it gives you an idea of where it's at. Do we need this? Well, It might add to the story, it might not. We do have some information in this already that tells you where the people might be, where this person might be, where the action might be taking place. Because we have saguaro cactus. Saguaro cactus are mentioned. These saguaros are not really found out of a certain geographic area in the world. Predominantly found, especially at that time, would have been found in a smaller area. It's why when films are set in Arizona, but there are no saguaros to be found, you know they filmed it somewhere else. There's none in the background. No matter where they ride on their horses in this western, there's no saguaro anywhere. And you can tell, oh, okay, they didn't actually film this in Arizona. Somewhere else, maybe in New Mexico or Texas or something, but they've set it in Arizona for some reason. All right. And the opposite of that is when you're watching something that's like set in Texas and you see saguaro cactus in the background, you're like, oh, they didn't film this in Texas. They want you to think this is what Texas is like, but it's not. We're going to then add a new scene. So this program is called CellText. This is a specific program for writing a screenplay. I think you can also, let me see, you can also do, just save this real quick. You can write for like a play, audio drama, and they even have a specific comic book one, but I don't really care for that. It's not too much different in terms of how you write it, but instead of being printed out like a screenplay format like this, it's like these two separate boxes, and you have to write like the panel action and dialogue, and it's sort of strange. I prefer it this way. All right, so we've also, this is the same exterior, so we want to do this one. The cowboy is walking down to the valley. We could include this in the same description, but I'm going to separate it because I feel like it. Because I think of these as two different scenes. They're a continuation of the scene before, but it's a change of location somewhat. I don't know if that's right. You can write it however you want. To the valley. His rifle is slung over his shoulder. We see his clothes clearly. We'll put his face and clothes clearly. He appears gruff, so we'll give a description of him. And that could be, let's say, we'll write that a different way. He appears to be around, to be in his 40s. He has a weathered face and has not shaved in a few days. Speckled with gray hair. His beard and hair is speckled with gray. Nears the deer, unslings his rifle, and sets it on the ground, leaning on a nearby. Let's see. We'll put it on the ground. And leans it against a nearby tree. Takes out large knife and begins to work on the deer. I don't know why it begins to work on the deer. I also want to put more information up here that he has a pack on his back. So, and he is wearing a satchel on his back. We'll leave it up to whoever's adapting this whether or not they want to show the butchering of the deer and if they think that's important. So we're not going to describe him cutting all of the, butchering the deer, removing the hide or anything like that. But we will put the information that he ties up the hide and wraps the meat paper, newspaper, wraps the meat in newspaper and places it into the satchel. Also want to go back and say that he then sets the satchel on the ground nearby. He wraps the hide and binds it with a small cord. He attaches the hide to the top of the satchel. So overall, we have the cowboys walking down into the valley. His rifle is slung over his shoulder, and he's wearing a satchel on his back. We see his face and clothes clearly. We need to describe the clothes as well. I wish we did not do. He appears to be in his 40s. He has a weathered face and has not shaved in a few days. His beard and hair are speckled with gray. He nears the deer, unslings his rifle, and leans it against a nearby tree. He then sets his satchel on the ground against on the ground nearby. He takes out a large knife and begins to work on the deer. He wraps the meat newspaper and places it into the satchel. He wraps the hide and binds it with a small cord. I think I got hide and bind combined there. Attaches the hide to the top of the satchel. So let's go back and we'll describe his clothes. He wears he is wearing a wide-brimmed hat with a let's put that for now. With a wide-brimmed hat, and a sturdy cotton shirt with a vest on top of it. just a basic idea of what he looks like to give an idea. All right. So what do we know about this guy from this scene? Well, he knows how to butcher the deer. He's not going to be carrying the entire deer's body back up out of the valley. He's doing all the butchering there, and then he's going back to his horse. We'll see in a bit. As he then, once finished, he picks, actually what we'll do is, once finished with this, he takes a small spade, digs a hole. I don't know if we want to do that, because he could just leave it out, but probably drag it away from the water. He drags the remains carcass. How do you spell carcass? It's not a word I really write out all that often. Carcass. Nope, it's a carcass. Carcass. Further away from the brook. Picks up his satchel and rifle. And begins climbing up out of the valley. He walks a fair distance before we see a horse. He slings the rifle to a holster. Be more clear about this. A rifle, holster, the saddle, and then ties the satchel to the back of the horse. The saddle. He mounts the horse and begins to ride away. And there's the opening part of our story. We probably should just combine these two, which I think I will probably do here. Because it's really, I mean, it's a change of scene, but it's not big enough where it matters, so we'll just do that. We'll kind of separate them here to give an idea of what's happening. Now we can go back in there and we can add stuff into what we've already written. It's not set in stone. It's not some finalized thing. We'll go back after the whole thing is written and revise it, and we can revise it as we go. But what I'd like to do is kind of get this bare bones thing and then look it over, add some stuff, and then as we get further and we determine things that happen in the story, it might be prudent to go back and revise things. Maybe we change up the ideas or some of the things that happen that we've hinted at already. I'm not going to say too much about what we've hinted at, but we've already put some symbolism in here. We've already packed some symbolism into the story. Not only are we conveying information about things like the lands, where he's at, the landscape, what kind of skills he has, what kind of knowledge he has, but we also have some symbolism in with those things. And that, I think, is a good way to do things. If a bad storyteller will have a character just spout off a bunch of political jargon, or they'll just say the themes outright, and they'll just be like, oh, this is what you should believe. And sometimes that can work if you're a good writer, I guess. But for the most part, it doesn't really usually work. So it's better to convey that information through things like themes, symbols, and actions of the character. What are they doing? Do their actions line up with what their beliefs are? What are their beliefs? Can we convey those beliefs through action? Can we convey their skills, their knowledge base? What if, when the cowboy goes to cook some of this meat later in the night, we show a scene of him cooking, and as the meat is cooking and then he's eating, he's reading from a book. What is that book? If we show what book that is, that can convey more information about him. Is he an educated man who's chosen to be doing what he's doing? Is it some sort of dime novel? Is it a book on philosophy or religion? Is it, some sort of English literary work of the time that he's purchased somewhere and he's reading? Does that tell us something about the character? Can that book relate to the story and its themes that we're telling? These are all ways to convey information about the character without having to just spell it out. Like, this is what I believe. You then don't have these grand plans revealed, like, these characters going on these monologues of like, this is what I believe. And the other person's like, no, this is what I believe. And you have these dueling monologues and there's no real dialogue happening. I'm sure you've seen that in comic books, especially like melodramatic superhero ones, or even in other creative fiction works. But the more information we relay to the reader, the more information we give to them throughout the story, based on what the character does, what their surroundings look like. Can those surroundings have symbology or symbols about the plot or the themes inside of it? What can you put in the background that conveys some sort of, that enhances that theme? If you plan all this stuff out ahead, then when you get to the storytelling aspect of it, the filmmaking, you can add more, or in this case, a comic book, drawing this, you're also going to be able to relay that information in that way, and then add stuff to it. Maybe it's a different person is drawing the comic than is writing it. Maybe it's a collaborative project. That person can say, oh, it'd be good to include this in here. I see what you're doing here. And you see what the writer wants, and then also add to it. But you also don't want superfluous information. If you add something, it should have a purpose. We want to show what the cowboy looks like briefly. We want to show that he has a rifle, he has a satchel, he has a knife, and now he has the meat from the deer that he's taking somewhere. We're also learning about him, right? He's alone in the desert. He's taking care of himself through hunting. That's how he's feeding himself, at least right now. Is he on a journey somewhere? Is he going somewhere? Well, that we'll learn as the story unfolds. And here we have a scene entirely without dialogue. No narration. Just sound. We could go back and, like Edwin said earlier, he asked, is there a smell, a feeling, like heat, or a sound? We could go back and say it is hot, that indicate that it's hot. What's the weather like? Is it windy? Can we see that things are blowing in the background? Does he have to adjust his sights because of that? Well, that's information that we might include if we were including some sort of narration or something like that. Because a lot of times thought bubbles aren't really used as much now in comic books. Maybe that's something that we can't convey. That would be easier, like, oh, the wind, okay, you see what he's thinking. Nowadays they put all the thoughts in narration boxes if they include the thoughts of the character. But in like a film, you might have some sort of inner dialogue or something, but it's very rare because it doesn't quite communicate, right? Think of like the David Lynch Dune adaptation, where suddenly you're like hearing the character's inner thoughts. It just comes off as strange. It doesn't quite work. Hello, Jimmy. So when you're writing something, think about all this stuff. Think about the scene. Don't just move on to the next one right away, unless you're on a roll or something. But come back and think about it. What can I add to the scene to make it better? What can I do to enhance it? Is it hot? Is it windy? Is there sand swirling around because of the wind? Does the cowboy wait for the wind to settle, the sand to settle down in the valley? He sees a swirl of sand nearby, and he says, okay, well, let me wait. He waits for that to settle down, and then he shoots. You don't know. You can think about all that stuff. And then that conveys more visual information for the people who are turning this script into a comic book or film. Let me show you what this... So if we're going to have somebody talk, we would... we go cowboy. Put dialogue. Hello. See, and then next time we write it, we've added a character. And so if we start to type it in, it'll suggest it. We just hit enter. And that way we don't have to type it all out. That's why I like this, writing it with this type of a screenwriting program. Because if you say you have a location that you're reusing, and you say like let's say it's an interior saloon, something like that. We can even give it a name like Jimmy's Saloon. Then the next time we go to write a scene in Jimmy's Saloon, we just type interior J and Jimmy's Saloon will come up. And then we can just push enter, and it's a time saver. Often I'll give my characters short names. I'm like John, because I don't want to write it all out. If I'm writing a book or prose, so when I'm like, oh man, I don't want to give them a name like Sir Reginald Barclay, Wingstone the Fifth, and then have to write that entire thing out like Sir Reginald. Like anytime I want to talk about, like Sir Reginald picked up the apple, and then you're like, oh, Sir Reginald did this, Sir Reginald did that. Oh man, just give them short names or nicknames. Well, I hope that you guys found this interesting, those of you who have watched, and I thank you for taking the time to see this. I'm going to be working on this script in the future. I don't know that I'm going to write it all on stream or anything, but I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to see a little bit of the process of writing something. I'm not sure if studying writing and taking a screenwriting course in college makes me an expert or anything, but I at least have been instructed on how to do it and how to think about it. And what I may do is, when I think there's important things to talk about, like in screenwriting, I might do another stream like this where we're writing a scene and I want to explain some of the elements of a screenplay that make it work. But hopefully you learned something, or you got some ideas if you're thinking about doing some writing. And these things can be translated not just in scripts/screenplays, but to prose writing as well. How can the environment tell us something about this story? What information do we need to convey? Is this extra information, or is it necessary for the story? These are all things to keep in mind. Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't think I have much more to do. I don't want to... The next scene, I think I'm going to write is him eating the deer, so we'll at least set that up. I'll just put exterior or some desert night. That way we know that's where I'm going to start next time, because I have something in my mind, but I don't want to write it out right now. One of the advantages of this program is you can actually change the scenes where the characters, like when a character comes up, you can bring up the characters and you can delete this. Like if I don't want this to be automatic, right? Like, okay, well, I want to delete this. Delete. Yeah, I want to delete that scene. It's like, okay, well, there it is. You can delete them here. You can get rid of them. And it's keeping track of all your scenes here. So if you go back and you're like, I need that scene where they're in Jimmy's saloon. Okay, here it is. I can go right to it instead of just scrolling through looking for it. You can also be able to look at the characters and their dialogue and everything. So it's an interesting program. If you haven't taken a look at it, I'd recommend it. It's spelled CELTX, one word, Celtex. And it's pretty good. I like it. I found it to be quite useful. There's also like Final Draft and stuff like that, but that costs more money. I believe Celtex was free when I first got it. Or I might have purchased it. I don't recall. But I think it's free. Let's see. Pricing. For script writing. Yeah, $7.50. Oh man, it's like I guess it's a subscription fee now. I don't know. Up to you. I bought this a long time, or got it a long time ago, so I guess it was cheaper then. Right, if you guys are at all interested in supporting the work here, I do have a Patreon, which I will link in the chat, which if you feel so inclined, you could support for as little as $1 a month. It doesn't have to be some big amount, but just $1 a month, you can support the work. And as we get more money on there, we'll be able to do more content. I have a plan to do a podcast. If we get to $50 a month, I'm going to be launching a podcast that basically the idea is I'll be interviewing people and discussing movies, television, books, something that has influenced this person, why they value it, the themes and things that spoke to them or stood out to them, why they think it's important, things like that. And it's going to be hopefully a wide variety of people, just everyday people that, you know, they're not famous or anything, but they love some sort of piece of literature or some piece of art and they want to talk about it. And then also, hopefully, I'd like to get some artists and storytellers on as well, as maybe people from other fields, pastors, professors, things like that, to have them come on and discuss those things. And I already have a few people in mind that I think we can get. And so at $50 a month, we're going to be launching that podcast, hopefully. And right now we have two patrons, two very faithful patrons who have each pledged $1 a month. And so when we get to that $50 point, then at that point I'm paying for the two podcasts I already host, Cross Section and Coin A Geek, as well as paying for a third podcast to be hosted with an archive and everything so people can go back and listen to it. Hosting costs money, and that's why we're looking to get that $50 amount, basically, so all that is paid for. And, you know, I'm not... And you guys are helping support that work. You can also, if you're interested in supporting the channel and you don't want to pledge a reoccurring payment, we also have a merchandise store set up on Redbubble. And that merchandise includes stickers and shirts and things that you can put these designs on, these things I've drawn. So you can go on there and take a look at that if you're at all interested, and that money will go to support what we're doing here. Also, if you feel so inclined, you can like and share these things out. Live streams are this one might be a little bit better because there is some information sort of conveyed here and not just a rambling interaction show. But what's probably better to share out is some of these pre-recorded videos I've made. If you found one of those that you remember that was really interesting or thought was funny, those would be good to share out from time to time to try to get new people into the channel. I appreciate everybody that has watched today and maybe is watching this after the fact. I think I'm going to leave this one up and available for people to watch. I'm really grateful for everybody, and yeah, we'll see you next time. Yeah, next time we'll see you. Adios.